There are few shows as important to a single medium as Dexter's Lab was for televised animation. Think that's conjecture? If I take away Dexter from this picture, well, you might also be saying goodbye to Timmy, Danny, Jenny, Jack, Bubbles, and maybe, just maybe, an entire network. Dexter's Lab was so much more than a manic piece of animation about an adolescent scientist. It was a breakthrough moment for a network and a creator who would go on to create works that literally reshaped the way we would view animation. This is a story of one experiment gone right and everything that came after. Once upon a time, Cartoon Network was a relatively unknown quantity. It was a station that you'd flip to get one thing and that thing only: reruns of Hanna-Barbera cartoons. The network aired no original content. Instead, it focused on preserving the worlds of the Jetsons and Flintstones. This is Big Sister. It's the second of two shorts, the one that would lead to the greenlighting of Dexter's Lab. The show would be the very first entirely animated block of original programming for Cartoon Network. The network was struggling to make a name for itself and identify its approach to original programming. Dexter's was its compass. The series was a massive success, both validating the network's foray into animated programming and giving the network a foundation to build upon. In some ways, Dexter's was the birth of the Cartoon Network you probably grew up with. But Dexter himself was proof of another reality.
I am ready for my close-up, Miss Leibowitz. Yes, I am handsome, I know.
When Genndy Tartakovsky sat down to create Dexter's Lab, he didn't create Dexter, he created Dee Dee. He drew this tall dancer with an engorged head, and then, in an attempt to create her polar opposite, he drew a small block. As he says, that small block was Dexter. Animation, specifically children's animation, had fallen into a bit of a rut in the early 90s. A formula had developed in an attempt to recreate the icons of the previous Hanna-Barbera generation. Genndy created an icon by throwing the playbook out the window. In fact, Dexter, as one Cartoon Network exec put it, was created to, well, literally be an icon. He is short, square, and extremely simple in design, his facial structure being limited in an effort to make him easier to animate, with his giant glasses juxtaposing his stout frame. Dexter is extremely idiosyncratic in design. His age is intentionally imperceptible. He was given an accent because, as Genndy put it, all great scientists have accents, and most importantly, the way he's animated borrows from anime and Japanese influences, seen literally in this kaiju reference, melded together with classic Hanna-Barbera techniques. Close your eyes and I guarantee you can identify Dexter.
Hey, that was not in the original blueprint.
Open them and you can identify him with your ears taped shut. Give him a beard and you could find him in a Where's Waldo book. Turn him into a cocoon. And the same can be said with the traditional hand-drawn cell animation that the series used for the first two seasons, adding to the character's aesthetic. Dexter showed a team of very important people that creating an animated icon in the children's space no longer required you to follow a template. It simply required you to do things differently. This lesson wasn't lost on the people that created the show either. Dexter's impact is probably best felt in the careers that the show shaped. Ever wondered why Dexter's is still remembered so fondly today? Well, it's because it was phenomenal, sure, and that's because it was the start of the careers of people who would go on to define talent in the industry.
Hi, Dexter! Dee Dee, what are you doing in my laboratory?
Craig McCracken, he was Gendy's right-hand man on Dexter's. He'd go on to create the Powerpuff Girls, and later Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, where he'd take the same idiosyncratic approach to character design and apply it to people like Wilt and Eduardo. Seth MacFarlane would get a big break in the industry, writing and supporting Genndy on Dexter's Lab as well. That's right, the man behind Family Guy. Dexter's was one of the first shows that paved his eventual path to Peter and the Griffins. Butch Hartman would also write and storyboard for Dexter's, a show in which he would learn a lot of the lessons that led to the creation of Fairly Odd Parents and Danny Phantom. Even to this day, we're still seeing the impact of that team, like Chris Savino, who would eventually create the Nickelodeon show Loud House. The people creating Dexter's Lab, most of which were working on their first big show for a bigger network, are people that weren't just talented, they were the talent. The talent that would go on to define an entire generation of animation, and all of them, at one point in time, sat at the same table, creating, writing, animating the adventures of these two. But more importantly, those adventures helped shape and mold the very adventures they'd create long after Dexter's and Dee Dee's ended. And yet Dexter's most important accomplishment is one that's much harder to miss.
Clumsy me!
Throughout the 90s, animation was attempting to break a new kind of mold. The Hanna-Barbera era presented a style of animation and narrative that was aimed mostly at children, with very little concern for adult viewers. Genndy and Dexter set out to assist in breaking the mold for animation that was layered, created with viewers of all ages in mind. Dexter's wasn't a simple children's show. The action scenes were built with purpose and nuance in a way that was extremely rare to see in Western animation at the time. Staged and cinematic in ways as a kid I don't even think I noticed. Dexter's, when visualizing action, used techniques for pacing and framing that were typically reserved for Japanese animation or more cerebral live-action films, and yet here Dexter's is providing us with fights that very few shows have ever and will ever be able to stylistically replicate in the animation space of the West. The training wheels for what Genndy would eventually accomplish with Samurai Jack. The writing was consistently elevated beyond traditional slapstick as well, like this joke.
Your club is for big IDKSCs.
IDKSC? Hey, I'm gonna tell Mom!
Play a little word scramble and you'll see what Dee Dee just called Dexter. This here is a play on a drug deal, and this, well...
Yes, dancing. I'd like to see you dance.
Oh, okay, but it's $50 extra.
I think you're smart enough to get that one on your own. The most difficult hurdle to jump, however, when working in animation is understanding the breadth of your audience. And in doing all of these things, Dexter's pushed the limits of what animation was at the time, through both humor, writing, and action. And it did so while proving that there could be substance within animation of all kinds, regardless of concept. A lesson that every modern piece of subversive or even slapstick animation of today can trace back to shows like Ren and Stimpy and Dexter's.
Stay away from me!
By the time season 2 of Dexter's Lab wrapped up, Genndy was burnt out, exhausted as he put it, ready to move on from the weight of the series. This wasn't a bluff, he left it behind, ending the show then and there, and it isn't hard to see why. It's for the very same reasons that Cartoon Network would revive the show for 2 more seasons down the line. Dexter's was a clear and obvious labor of love. From its hand-drawn animation to the attention to detail in both the writing and the visuals, the show was unlike anything else on television at the time. But I don't think even Genndy, as he walked away after season 2 never to return, understood the legacy the show would carry and the impact it would have on both the network and the people who had a hand in creating it. But I think it's clear that the biggest impact the show had was on us, the viewers. Dexter's Lab was the first time I felt like I was seeing something I had never seen before splash across my television screen. This guy was the first animated character whose voice I tried to imitate, whose figure I wanted to learn how to draw. Not just because he was unique, but it felt like I could. By keeping it simple and deceptively hiding the show's complexities in plain sight, Dexter's was able to make millions of kids for the very first time feel like animation was something within their grasps. And then as we got older and revisited the show, we understood that there was so much more to grab onto. Dexter's was the entry point for so many into how weird, how strange, and how far the limits of the animation that had come before it could be stretched. My childhood rests in the house that Dexter's Lab built. I'm willing to bet some of yours does too.
Today was a fine day for science.
That is a wrap on today's episode of Nerdstalgic. If you enjoyed this one, press the like button down below. This was some of the most fun I had revisiting a series for this channel in a long time, so I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Also, hit that subscribe button down below as well. That'll make sure you always know when a new video goes up on the channel, and if you hit the bell next to that subscribe button, you'll actually be notified when I upload, which is super helpful for both me and you. So press subscribe and the little bell next to it. As always, with every video here on your screen are 2 more episodes of Nerdstalgia. You can click on either of those to continue watching stuff from this very channel. And I hope to see you guys in the next video.